And now we come to the end of our conference with our last speaker, and that will be Congresswoman Virginia Foxx. The Congresswoman is going to talk about technology's impact on jobs. Since 2005, she has represented North Carolina's 5th District in the House of Representatives, and she currently chairs the House's Subcommittee on Higher Education and Workforce Training. Before this, she was a state senator and had a distinguished career in the education sector, including the president of Mayland Community College and the assistant dean at Appalachian State. Please join me in welcoming Congresswoman Virginia Foxx.
Thank you very much, Steve. I appreciate the invitation. Whoops. Put it back. Well, it doesn't want to stay. I appreciate the invitation. I've spoken at your conference once before, and Steve and I couldn't remember exactly when. I don't know what that's a sign of, but in the last couple of years, I think. And I appreciate you're all being willing to be flexible with the program. You know, we're in session this week, and we are not in control of our schedules. I'm going to diverge from my comments that I prepared to respond to the question that was just asked for just a minute. I didn't hear the exact question, but the panelists commented about stigma, and I think is the person here want to repeat the question? Was it somebody up here? Yes, what was the question again?
I was just talking about if we're talking about blue-collar jobs and wanting the next generation to take those jobs, then we need to work to alleviate that stigma, and how are we doing that?
Well, let me just say, again, I didn't come, it's not in my prepared remarks, but I want to tell you, I talk about this all the time. Very quick story, very quick story. I have a brother who's 8 years younger than I am, and when he was a senior in high school, 1969, I had graduated in 61. It took me 7 years, though, to get my undergraduate degree because I worked full-time, went to school part-time. He said to me, "I don't want to go to college, but I don't want you and Mom and Daddy to be ashamed of me." He got my attention back then about exactly what she's talking about. I said, "What do you want to do?" He said, "I want to be a carpenter." I said, "That's great, Butch." I said, "But don't just go out here and get a job with a contractor and go to work, because you need some certification to prove you're a good carpenter." And he was good. So I was able to set up an apprenticeship program. I'm making a very long story short, but an apprenticeship program, because we needed desperately skilled people in our area at that time. I was in the mountains of North Carolina, but there was a resort going up. And he and 3 other guys graduated among 17, 3.5 years later. The other guys kept going. But he had certification, which is very important, I think, in our culture. We all know that. And I knew that then. And I'm not sure how I knew it, but I knew it. Now, my brother is a lot smarter than I am. I will tell you that. I have 3 degrees. But when desktop computers came out, not too long after that he got his journeyman license, he helped me. He came to me and said, "You got to get a computer. I'll show you what to buy. I'll set it up for you." I mean, he built his own house, plumbed his own house, did all of that. The comments that were being made here. And yet people like my brother who don't have baccalaureate degrees don't feel like first-class citizens in our culture. And yet they're 70% of the population. Now, I will tell you the Don Quixote that I am. I am on a kick to change our language and to change the way we think about this. I talk a lot about the fact that not everybody needs a baccalaureate degree, and certainly they don't need it 4 years out of high school or 6 years out of high school, because it takes 6 years now to get a baccalaureate degree. I want everybody to have a baccalaureate degree, ultimately, but they don't have to have it immediately after graduating from high school. And so I'm a big promoter of lifelong learning. And the other thing, language is very important, I think, in the way we talk about these, about what are the alternatives that people have. And I would urge you to do this. I know there are many people here, you've worked with education programs, but you probably call them the horrible T word. Has anybody ever heard me give this speech before? You call them training programs. We never talk about people in a baccalaureate program being trained, but we talk about people in those other programs being trained. Well, the only thing that I remember from my doctoral work is my professor telling a student one night, you train animals and you educate people. So I contend that if we will begin with changing our language about how we talk about people who are in programs other than a baccalaureate or master's or doctoral program, that we can change a lot of what is considered a stigma. But I also would like you to think that 70% of the people in this country or more do not have baccalaureate degrees. And yet we have set up a system where we have 2 tiers in our country. And that's terrible. It's just terrible that we do that. Because most of those people are a hell of a lot smarter than we are with baccalaureate degrees. So, anyway, back to what I came here to talk about. But I suspect that'll be what you remember of my comments tonight. I have the great honor and privilege to chair the Education and Workforce Committee, and I do consider it that. Again, growing up poor in Western North Carolina when I did, I never had any idea I'd be where I am today. And it's really important, I think, that we have those 2 concepts together in the one committee. In years past, most of the emphasis has been on education, and people rarely ever mention workforce issues. But frankly, in the last year, in the last couple of years, we've been dealing more with workforce issues than we've been dealing with education issues. But they're so intertwined. You cannot really talk about one without talking about the other. So on the workforce side, though, we deal with worker protections, retirement savings, healthcare options, and regulations, just to name a few. On the other side, we deal with all federal education policy. But if there's any issue that lies at the heart of everything we do and that brings those 2 together, it's workforce development. Making sure people have access to what they need to pursue the jobs and lives they want for themselves. After all, people want to get a job so they'll have a successful life. And everybody going for a baccalaureate degree, what do they want when they finish? A job. So it's all career education. I get aggravated with that too. We talk about people who are going into something other than a baccalaureate is going for a career. How many of you know that Harvard College began as a vocational school? Anybody in here know that? We were running out of educated ministers in this country early on. And Harvard was begun to help ministers learn theology. It was a vocational school, frankly. But everything in education, preparing people to work, is vocational. So workforce development is also economic development. You're here to talk about that. But they're 2, again, intertwined. Right now, there's 6.1 million jobs unfilled in this country. And they're unfilled because too many American workers lack the skills to fill them. And we should have seen this coming a long time ago. That's why we may need some real creative thinking going on the way we approach workforce development. I don't know how many people are in here ever heard of the book Future Shock, but I was thinking a lot about it in the last few weeks. I've been giving a lot of speeches like this lately. So let me humor an old sociology instructor for a minute to take you back to 1970 when Alvin Toffler published Future Shock. It was a prediction for the future. Toffler talked a lot about transience and permanence, but some of the observations about education and the future workforce were very simple and very head-on. One observation Toffler made is really on my mind lately as the committee prepares not to reauthorize but reform the Higher Education Act. He said, "It would be a mistake to assume that the present-day educational system is unchanging, but much of this change is no more than an attempt to refine the existent machinery, making it ever more efficient in pursuit of obsolete goals." When I read the reference to obsolete goals, I think about so many students finishing baccalaureate or graduate programs with mounds of debt and no job prospects. Toffler had an answer, though. He pointed out something Herbert Gurjoy had said, that we're wrong to focus on teaching people how to simply read and write. We have to teach people how to learn, unlearn, and relearn. And that's really where we are right now. The American people understand this too. There's a recent Wall Street Journal NBC poll that said 49% of Americans believe a four-year degree will actually lead to a good job and pay. 49%. 47% of Americans aren't so sure college is worth it anymore. So as usual, the American people are ahead of us in many ways. Now, just when I got here tonight, I found about this new study that you all have done, which looks fascinating, and I love the title of it, How to Reinvigorate Higher Education for the 21st Century. I'm so glad you all are thinking about it. We are working on our reform, as I said, of the higher education bill. So what are the solutions? It's a funny thing when you become a committee chair. People come in and tell you lots of things about what they're doing. So I'm learning a lot about solutions that community colleges and business are putting into place to help educate a skilled workforce. Some of the best solutions for workforce development are really being driven by industry. McDonald's, Hamburger U has been around since 1961. They've educated more than 80,000 restaurant managers, owners, and operators. More companies are embracing that concept and thinking about the future. United Technologies' Employee Scholar Program has resulted in more than 38,500 degrees earned. Employees can earn a degree in any field, whether or not it's related to their job. J.P. Morgan Chase is investing $75 million in career education programs aimed at youth. Apple just started a coding program at Austin Community College in Texas that will count toward an AAS degrees in computer science, information technology, and animation, just to name a few. Today, Secretary Acosta testified before the committee about his priorities in leading that department. We talked a lot about people in Washington working together for the future of economic growth. That's what sounds good, and that needs to happen. But for real sustained economic growth, we need more than the branches of government to work together. We need government at every level, especially the local level, working with and taking cues from industry leaders and educational institutions. Everybody has to come to the table if we're going to fill those 6 million jobs we have now and the future jobs that are sure to result from more technology and innovation. The fact that you all want to address these changing workforce needs is very encouraging to me. So go home, talk with local industry folks, talk with local workforce development groups, and set your minds to create models for communities at every size across the country to follow. We'll work to do our part in Washington, primarily to stay out of the way of where you are and where you can go. And we'll hopefully learn a thing or two from you along the way. Thank you very much.
Hello, I am Roberta Stanley from Michigan. I'm a former employee of the House, formerly Education and Labor Committee. You've talked about your reform package for the student financial aid programs and the Higher Ed Act. Is there any way that Congress can address this issue of the loan rate being so much higher than mortgage rates and kind of get a lid on that?
I know this is going to sound crazy to you because it sounds crazy to anybody with any common sense. When we introduce bills and when we pass bills, any committee, we have to have a CBO score to go along with it. Now, I suspect you all have heard a lot about CBO scores in the last year and a half because they've been in the news a lot. The current interest rate was set, I think 6 years ago, 7 years ago, and hasn't been changed since then. Republicans actually argued for an interest rate that would move with the prime, but we lost that argument. We were in the minority. But as I said, when we pass legislation, everything has to be scored by the CBO. And lowering interest rates actually scores as a cost to the government. And we cannot pass legislation, not even supposed to introduce legislation, that scores as a cost unless we can come up with an offsetting savings. And that's the reason the interest rate is staying the way that it is. I can help, if you've worked with the committee, then I'm assuming you understand that. But if you want more technical details about that, I'm happy to give them to you. I can tell you I cannot explain the way CBO scores, and there aren't many people who can. It's a mystery of CBO. But I can tell you that as we're working to reform higher education, everything we're doing, we send pieces to CBO to score every little piece. And what generally slows us all down in getting legislation passed is the time it takes to get the scores from CBO.
Thank you. I worked for the Honorable William D. Ford. There is another concern too, though. The current secretary wants to do away with the loan forgiveness program. And I understand a whole lot of employees in the federal government, including the House and Senate, benefit by that, as do teachers in rural schools and impoverished districts. So may I implore you to please take a good look at that. Thank you.
Thank you very much. I appreciate it.